I want you to bear in mind a very important statistic, which is that 12% of the world's population lives in the West, and 88% of the world's population lives outside the West. And let me make one point very clearly and very boldly at the very beginning. How the 12% views China is not how the 88% views China. And so, for example, when you ask about what is China trying to accomplish, and if you want to sort of, if I can share with you what I pick up from my conversations with my fellow Asians, with Africans, with Latin Americans, they see that China is trying to come back once again as a strong civilization, which it once used to be. And you know, China, as he knows better than I do.
大家好，这里是感人四绝频道。刚才这把交锋最值得记住的，恐怕不是的国更较硬，而是真正看明了世界正在发生的变化。面对所该狼外交和中该微交的窒息，基肖直没有回避中价之战的摩擦，掰把门带放回全球见女。西方只去世界人口的 12%， 西方之外的 88%， 又是如何看待中基的？在森州、非洲和拉丁美洲许多国家眼中，中举的崛起首先是一把文明福将，是一股沉寂已久的大撅重新找回自己的位置，而不是某些媒剧口中的神级意识。更有意思的是，签上的美没有铅笔，就唱困笔，就唱困笔，一亲笔又成名中笔，要有成绩世界校准的剑笔，一季方举论的背狗，正是一股无法回避的门带。美剧究竟想遏制中举，看是 BC 中挂共存。接下来我明比抗击霸性相对的最下，如何技和地级干锐大型华裔，科技和地级干相对的最下，如何碎西满海，以及人类共同面对的三等的后三。
So what the US is doing is not surprising. It's predictable. And if you put X or Y, that's exactly what would happen, because the US has been used to being number one. It doesn't want to see displaced to another power. But at the same time, while this is predictable and expected, what is not clear to the rest of the world that is obviously watching this contest and is very worried about this contest, what exactly are the main strategic goals of the United States in this contest? You know, and this, frankly, as I say in my book, Has China Won? That insight I got from Henry Kissinger in a one-on-one conversation when I was writing my book, Has China Won? And Hamid, to some extent, you alluded to it in your remarks too. So, for example, is it the goal of the United States to stop the economic growth of China? Maybe that's why you have trade tariffs, chips, sanctions, and so on and so forth. Is that the goal? Can't be done. Or is it the goal to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? Again, I'll explain later, it can't be done. Or is it the goal to do what the United States did with the Soviet Union, contain it effectively, leave it confined to a small universe, and have it disengaged from the rest of the world? Again, as I'll explain later, it can't be done. So then at the end of the day, what the world is asking is, what exactly does the United States want to accomplish in this contest, and what will be the end game?
Okay, fantastic. Well, you've already put a lot on the table for us to come back and discuss, including fundamental changes, the rise of a multipolar system, the economic power and dynamism of Asia, new cultures, which I think is a really interesting point we should circle back to, but also raised a lot of questions about U.S. strategic goals. So, Orville, could you give us your perspective? What are the U.S. and China competing over, and why? You know, what does the U.S. hope to achieve with this, and what is the end state that we're looking for?
Well, it's always a great pleasure to talk with Kishore, because it immediately makes me think in ways that I don't normally have to think. The first thought that occurs to me after hearing your remarks is this. You ask, what's the United States' new strategy post-1972, I guess we could call it engagement? I would like to ask you, what do you think China's strategy is? What are they after? Because actually, this is a dance between two partners. It isn't just up to the United States, as I'm sure you would agree. So what do you think China is after? And if I may ask you a question, what power with great power pretensions adopts wolf warrior diplomacy, antagonizes, who antagonizes Canada, Sweden, Norway, Australia, India? I could go on. And why? What's going on here? How is that in the advantage of anybody, much less China?
By all means, go ahead.
I was looking forward to the opening remarks of
Forgive me, Kishore,
I thought you would have some 7 minutes of prepared remarks.
I don't want
give
to
me
give
some
you
time
any
to
bait.
think. But I'm very happy, Orville, to answer your question. And if you don't mind, again, forgive me for doing this. When you talk about our world and how the world sees, especially what China's goals and strategies are, I want you to bear in mind a very important statistic, which is that 12% of the world's population lives in the West, and 88% of the world's population lives outside the West. And let me make one point very clearly and very boldly at the very beginning. How the 12% views China is not how the 88% views China. And so, for example, when you ask about what is China trying to accomplish, and if you want to if I can share with you what I pick up from my conversations with my fellow Asians, with Africans, with Latin Americans, they see that China is trying to come back once again as a strong civilization, which it once used to be. And China, he knows better than I do. He's the China expert. By the way, I'm not a China expert. Let me emphasize that one time. Immediately, I'm a China observer. And of course, we have to be China observers because in Southeast Asia, as you all know, geographically, the power that is going to have the greatest impact on us clearly is China. Just sheer proximity. Just as Latin America will live in the shadow of the United States of America, Southeast Asia has to live in the shadow, actually, of China and India, I must also emphasize. So our perspective, and that of other Africans, is that we've seen this civilization for 4,000 years go up, go down, go up, go down. And so the return of China is just part of a long 4,000-year history of dynastic cycles. And when the Chinese civilization goes down, it can go down very, very badly. And I think Orville knows better than any of us that they went through one of the worst centuries, the century of humiliation from 1842 to 1949. But it's not normal for the Chinese civilization to underperform for so long. It's much more normal for them to come back after a while. So what we see, therefore, from, let's say, from Southeast Asia, is the return of a civilization that we have seen for centuries go up and down. So this is a natural return. Now, so when China tries to claim a place in the world as one of the great powers, is a perfectly natural development. Now, you mentioned things, you use words like wolf warrior diplomacy. And what's interesting is that while the term wolf warrior diplomacy is so frequently used in the Anglo-Saxon media, and as you know, the Anglo-Saxon media, let's be very blunt about this, has a very jaundiced view of China, and the rest of the world discounts what the Anglo-Saxon media says about China. What the rest of the world does is to look at what China does and then deal with it. And at the end of the day, you will notice that countries have a choice. Do they want to trade with China, or do they not want to trade with China? And if you look at the deeds, China today does far more trade with the rest of the world than the United States does. By the way, we do want to have trade with the United States too. But trade, as you know, is a voluntary activity. But it benefits the countries that do it. So you take a country like Brazil, which is much, much closer to the United States than it is to China. 20 years ago, it took Brazil 1 year to export $1 billion to China. Today, it takes Brazil 60 hours to export $1 billion to China. So why shouldn't Brazil have a normal trading relationship with China? So you can see, therefore, the point I'm trying to suggest to you is that if you look at many of the countries in the global south, not all, at many of the countries in the global south, they're very happy to have normal relations with China, and they have no difficulties. The difficulties have come, as I said, primarily between the United States and China for understandable reasons. This is what would happen when you have a great power shift. And I actually think that in some ways, just as what the United States did towards China was predictable, China's responses towards the United States are also predictable.
Of course, we live in a really interconnected world now, correct? Right? Where the kind of this narrative about the rise and fall of great powers ends up reverberating in different ways. Countries are very happy to trade with China, and I will turn to Orville in a minute for his thoughts on, how the U.S. sees China's behavior. But I, from my perspective, do not think that the U.S. Wants to hurt, hamper, harm China's legitimate trade with the world. But at the same time, the countries are trading more with China. They're also seeking greater and greater security assistance from the U.S. Orville, could you break this down a little bit? What are some of the concerns about China's behavior as it rises that are causing this kind of demand signal for more U.S. Western attention, perhaps including some of the economic coercion activities you mentioned with Canada?
这把取美中劝劝摆全球秩序的对胆，表面上是在邓论群摆群究秩序的对胆，表面上是在邓论群摆股大局究竟摆什么，千百是在追门一股更重要的门台，即世界以笨局化之过，我慢看能不能用嫁去的思维去拉里今天的份儿啦敲反。美中摆线以笨中可以看出美中摆线以北摆曾罢的结摆。合作区相互依连，逐展走向激烈抗戦，甚至在一些议题上出现了直接对抗。中极的快速崛起，改曲了居宙的力量平衡，也改曲了美居最对抗中居的快速崛起，改就西方长期主导的世界，加去由西方长期主导的世界，也正在提成多国文明、多国力量共同塑造的世界。这意味着美中之间的矛盾踢步引进是榜一体秩序，这意味着美中之间的矛盾踢步捐设的是踢比展道路、政治制度、科技永载、地秩序以及多有 loss 制定起诉的门台。美去心中彼此必大影响力挑情既有秩序，中必搜提宁猜避美居正在利用蓝盟、寄居和金融币系，阻止中必恢复昂有的拒载地位。彼此方都把自己的行动解去防避，加把对方的行动看成进攻，战略互不信任就炸一步步加深，战略一步步加深。而这把抗击最值得注意的地方，在眼比世界上大多行家你不希望在美域和中极之间二选一。许多行家一方面需要中极的势霸、投资和防疫，另一方面又希望截住美域的安全密系与一股自身的迷略空感。他明比不是没有力霸，而是非常清楚，散暖任何一方都可能失去另一方必来的机币。对这些伊普拉加来法系真正成熟的外交，不是高唱宣布站在哪一笔，而是在夫法力量之间保持低匹，在合作右匹防范之间遵照平衡。东南必把右其值得重视，摘谷的右开人口群多，宗教、文化和政治制度高度多元。明区史上也曾长期把大非 Q 该 C 的交拜 C D C， 然而多年来东南来登南来家一直努力避免大规模 D C， 他明确美与保持8 C， 以8中8 C 线，以8中8 C 开展合作。美居两道人来出邀期，他命代家中加 C 提出合作，他命同民举回昂。证据的做法，你不意味着难弱，更不是没有元素。而是明白大局，永坚才追求自身利益，因此任何家都不能把安全寄托在某国大局的善意之上，也不能轻易把自己趴在一把炸上。正如对弹中所播，世界上没有永坚仁慈的大法，旧翁家往往只能接受歪格。真正的生存智慧是看清力量差距，保留自己的鲜明，同志基因可能避免被迷入乡突。 越南长期击打中击败局，既要掌住非百利，也要击败打和平相待。新加坡、印尼以及其他登满几百家也都在用各自的方式面对大败，既不能盲目驱散，也不能相动对抗。这一不代表所有 best 的友都可以被苗弹及地线南海 fast 以苗凯举贼、商改举贼、商改主该交迫以及中霸日益集中的该犀利皆抗独 gas 苗改举贼周改家感到不安。中剧是一股不完美的作家，以哇塞玩如此，买血同乖如此，把其中一方苗把场拽简不在于把其中一方苗挖场外程追称起。另一方苗许成秒对斜哈比，而在秒对能不能成引见许的夫外性，能不能把剧外行袜和政治宣许和苗茶，能不能在维护自身利益的同志，不要对还留下空感。其中比较对的引爆点他及捐设中比的银庙式既有可和民族情感，也捐设美需民众的生活方式三安全感，更捐设美需在富泰地区的温略越信尊安全感，进训米剧在富泰地安律赛学都可能引需难以控制的练错反昂。对普通人来说，最昂在警惕的不是某一句教应口歪，而是久盼无忌和意外升级。很多 C 学人都渴望，所有人都渴望，外所有人都渴望，而是因素各方都以速对手不惜真的行动。因此，维持和平的速度不是要求一方特地放弃篱笆，而是建立足必定的广通机制，敏感梗卷，控制quân宽袭击和司法力量之间的距离，避免局部摩擦演居成全面危机。面对南海以及其他敏感议题，克制尼布等越退散的模糊有致也不是难弱，而是一株越太和平保留质感和空看的建模闪弱，而是一株越逮喻但最后提出的地球比喻更值得我们反复思考。乍去人民仿佛生活在彼此隔离的古多追团上，一股越加出现门台未必立刻引向其他国家，但今天世界更像是一艘船上的古多旗立传旗。疫情跨越情界，计划越情界，哈后计划不计分制度，海洋污染、核武器、人工智能和能源危机也不可能被插在某一股计价计部。如果整艘船正在进水，母鸡有人只顾把自己的船擦好，所马己的安全最久也只是换拿。这正是今天最需要被重新凝析的剑丝刀。美中矿固然重要，但它不是人类唯一的任务，更不昂在吞噬所有外交资源。单把古大股把彼此系最大的微交制，单炮公共卫生、粮食安全和合富就可能被大到角落里。可阵线门带不息，因带大玩暂停，也不计因间谁彼此家之间互不信任就自动消失。所以真正成熟的奸略不是幻想劝系能签立刻结束，也不是相信任何一方见迷见接不，而是在劝签避限量避免失控，在制度存在差异的情况下接量避免失控，在制度存在差异的情况下间谁保留合作，在愈加利益必思为骨的同志。也气得人类面对的是共同的生存困境。美居需要重新审视自己的虚部门台，中居也需要理解美居需要重新审视自己的虚部门台，中居也需要理解弥增长必思伴随更居定、更克制、更能居就安心的一股比家能不能成既真正的大徐，不只取其徐币、奇谋和军事力量，也取其他能不能随着瓦家感到安全。既世界相信他的崛起不喜明塞难。这一把对弹没有求出一个干击答案，但他至少提醒我们这把对弹没有求出一个干击答案，但他至少提醒我们这把长期速贼也要经住举因行动，既要理解大兴的利益，也要参宗中小必家的密因，既不能低估千怎的威迷，也不能放弃和平的可能。那么在美中困攒的微驾驭的今天，您较世界昂在更加较硬的防范，看是昂在涌现恢复对哈合作，海和南海的燕角究竟昂在维持多久，又在如何维持？曲行在评论面留下您的看法，感谢您的收看，我明下期强亮向留下更多角度梳理曲摘局贼，响亮点亮亮看世界 CMView 频道必躺更多精彩视频。